everybody. How are you? My name is Casey Garrett, if you are new to me, and I'm the founder out here in California of Microdosing for Healing. I'm really happy to be joined tonight for our integration workshop with three of my most favorite guides. Sarah Hope, Nicole Lilly, and Brenna Gebauer are joining us tonight. And our first part of our evening is going to be presenting specifically around the topic of integration. So we're very fortunate tonight. We have some people who very recently journeyed, so we can focus later on, some very specific questions that may have come up. And then we're also going to spend a lot of time, for those of you who didn't journey recently, on some longer term aspects of integration work, both with microdosing as well as journeys. So thank you for being here with us. Again, I'd love to begin, just give each of our guides and experts time to introduce themselves and perhaps speak to kind of something very on their mind regarding integration and how it's applicable in this practice. So if you don't mind, Nicole, we'll have you start off this time. Good evening.
Hi, everyone. So Nicole Lilly, just a reminder that I'm here in Denver, Colorado. So, what's on my mind related to integration and this work? Integration it's such a big term. But for me, it's like integration is an ongoing process. Like it is the ongoing process of transformation is just, how we continue to meet ourselves, how I continue to meet myself, and come up against edges and let those edges be known, be challenging, show me parts of myself, and really having an opportunity to sit with and feel into and examine those aspects of my own being and how aligned or not they are with where I'm actually going. And so for me, like integration is the process. It's integrating the parts that we've disowned, disliked, really examining that, and also breaking down if it's something that's been a challenge of how to actually transmute that energy and transmute sort of the shadow aspects into something that is actually going to be beneficial and be our ally to transformation going forward. So I feel like it's so much bigger than integrating a single ceremony. Like integration it's life. So that's what's on my mind.
Beautiful. Sarah, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well. I also took a hike today. It was a beautiful hike. It's nice and warm down here, but there's like a lot of beautiful snow on Pikes Peak. So I'm enjoying Sunday. Thanks for asking about integration. I just with the question, kind of my orientation towards nature kind of just brought all these kind of like flashes of what integration means for me. We think of the term integration, and really it does mean like coming into wholeness, like bringing what is into wholeness. An integer is a whole number. And when we talk about it in terms of a journey, much like in nature, if there's been a disruption, like a desired disruption, like a shaking of the snow globe, or in nature, for example, a forest fire, a rainstorm, then there's a process of integrating what has happened, what has occurred. And sometimes that's like rebuilding, bringing back that baseline, bringing back that sense of equilibrium. So the best example I can really think of right now, or like the image that really flashed into my mind was in Costa Rica this summer, and there was this like spider that I would go and meditate, and I would just watch the spider every morning and how the spider was being, and like what was coming into the nest and what was flowing. And then there was this giant rainstorm, and I was in my little cabin thinking about like, oh, what is going to happen with that spider's web, and I went out there for my meditation in the morning, and I looked out on the jungle and saw how like all this new information came in, all these raindrops, and how everything was like soaking it up, creating anew. And then here's this spider, like his nest, it's like, like 5 feet wide and it's like totally destroyed. And here she goes and just like starts rebuilding it. And so I think that's my transmission for what integration is. It's like taking what has happened and creating or recreating anew.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Brenna, welcome. How are you?
Good. So good to be here with everyone again. Lovely to see you all. And I love to hear both what Nicole and Sarah shared, because the words were right there and you so eloquently said them. I through this work in my own journey, I have certainly come to the realization that life is integration and it's a constant process. There is no beginning or end to it. And it's not even just about medicine work. It's just about the symphony of life. And I was recently listening to Jeff Foster, if anyone knows his work, and he was saying to become whole is to hold. And I think that is all of the parts of ourselves. That's what the integration is kind of like what Nicole was saying about the shadow work, or Sarah was saying about the snow globe getting shaken. But really, when these parts of ourselves surface that we're unfamiliar with or have kind of tucked away because we weren't ready to work with them, is to really allow them to be held within ourselves compassionately and understand that they're surfacing at a time for a reason, because you're at a place in your own journey where it's ready to be seen. So, I also find integration to be super like playful and creative and messy. And like, just when you think you have it figured out, you don't. Like, personal example is at one point I was working with my own shame, and I planted a flower with my shame in it and waited for it to grow. And then I was supposed to go on a trip, and I thought I had integrated this shame. And when the flower hadn't blossomed, I started panicking. Like, do I just let it die? Do I put this potted flower in my car and take it on a road trip with me? What do I do? And then I realized I was still holding on to my shame. I hadn't let it go. And that was like 4 months after this journey. And it required being put in that position to be able to be like, I'm going to have my neighbor water it. And that was like a part of like allowing someone else to help me tend to some of my emotions. So, I think the other piece of integration is curiosity. Like, really, what is this? What's coming forward? And how do I make it part of myself? So I'm excited to dive into this topic tonight.
I love that. Love that analogy. Thank you. My first question is, after you've experienced a journey, particularly your first high dose journey experience, there's this tendency, very natural, to want to just rush out and talk about it like to everybody and anybody. And can you talk about that and how when you work with someone who has that tendency, is it best to kind of sit with yourself, to reflect for a while? How do you kind of coach people on, right in the hours and day following the journey? Nicole, if you want to lead off.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it makes a lot of sense, because part of what this work can offer, the opportunity, is to really unlock those places. And so when those places get unlocked, there's like this surge of energy and this surge of insight and this surge of like Shakti and creativity that really wants a place to land and to move. And so I like to coach people of like giving that energy a proper container. And that's part of where the preparation can come in too, to help set the stage for the integration that's later. So it's like, using the analogy of like a river and water, right? And so if we just had like this huge waterfall that was gushing and having all of this melting snow come down, but it didn't have a proper container, it would just kind of land in the ground and create mud and dissipate and really lose its power and lose its essence. And so I view what comes through in a journey in a similar way of, really creating a container, and that container is you, in large part, and being able to be with. So I mentioned last time, like running energy, and this is kind of a similar idea of like, what's our vessel? Like, what are we actually able to contain within ourselves before we just kind of prematurely discharge that energy, mix it with other people's thoughts, ideas, opinions about it, but really holding that container and getting clear on what direction do I want to actually flow this in? And so just kind of imagining that river, if there weren't the banks of the river in the container, it would really just kind of create a mess. And so this is part of intention and being intentional, and the way that these phases of the process really intersect. So that's how I like to view it.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Sarah, how about you?
Yeah, I like this question because on one of my first, intentional plant medicine journey, I was like definitely one of those people. I was like, oh, wow, I just got to tell the world. And, you can't, like, there's some people, like, oh my gosh, I would love to tell my dad and mom and tell them how much I love them and ask them if they understood that I was the universe and so are they. And that could be like really scary to people, right? Like, whoa, that's unusual, right? And then, I've had people do that as well, that, where somebody in their life got really alarmed, like, oh my gosh, you're a drug addict. We got to get you help. Let's get an intervention. Like, people aren't used to that. But I think that there's definitely a good question to ask there. Like, is it enough for us to be our own witness? Do we value our own experience? Are we in contact with our own observer enough to know that our experience is something valuable, important, interesting, just by our own observation? Like, can we witness that? Can we take some time with that? And then, yeah, where do we put all that energy? Right. Because there's this tendency to like, something amazing happened, I've got to tell everybody. And that might be a really young part of us, I'm just like thinking of my kids, like skipping out of the bathroom, like, I went poop in the potty. Like it feels really like it really matters, and to the rest of the world, they're like, oh, awesome. Poop in the potty. So yeah, I guess there's that maybe opportunity to take a look at how we witness ourselves. Are we able to take some time to value our own conversation, our own witnessing, our own absorbing what happened? Maybe there's, I like to make a suggestion of journaling or art, or a time in nature or a conversation with trees. I'm just kind of letting that experience settle a little bit before we proselytize. I often say when teaching classes, integration is not, proselytizing to your friends and neighbors about how everybody in the world must have a plant medicine experience, and it's not going out and taking more psychedelics or suggesting your whole family does. Like, so yeah, I guess those are my thoughts around that.
Well said. Yes. Yeah. Brenda?
Yeah. Yeah, this is kind of a both and. And one of the reasons I say that is going back to what we talked about on Friday, is that often having a support system that knows that you're going about this work means that people care about your experience. And so the other piece is, especially, if we're looking at psilocybin as an example, you're very open and receptive for a period of time where your neuroplasticity is really able to form. And if you go and share your experience, it's also possible that someone can make you question it because it's not their own. And by those seeds of doubt, it can really harbor the possibility of your truth to stay with you. So my recommendation for people when it comes to sharing, because, it would be strange if you had this experience and you had told your significant other that you were doing it, to not share anything with them, is to say, I'm still in the process of integrating and I want to talk to you about this, but I need a little bit of time because the process of integration and the somatic responses and the journey itself continues for weeks, if not months after ceremony. So I think it's also important to honor that. And I also think, as it was stated, the container is super important. Like, there is also being in the container of an integration circle with people who are all in their same process that has agreements about how to approach this and hold it. So just like knowing who you're approaching, what their experience is, and also, as it was stated, understanding that everyone's journey is their own. And these are your truths. And to really allow that to sink in before you start sharing, I think is super important. And the other thing about that feels noteworthy is to not get lost in the details when you do decide to share your journeys with people. Like, it's more about the lessons than the process of getting to the lessons. And I think that that's one of the areas where it can get kind of curious. Like you say, I went on a guided psychedelic journey, and a lot of people will ask, well, what's that like? You talk about being in eye shades or a headset and listening to a playlist or going out and like howling at the moon or whatnot. And for people who haven't had that experience, they'd say, well, that's strange. Why'd you do that? And those seeds of doubt plant as well. So just more about, these are the things that I learned about myself through it versus the mechanics of getting there.
Thank you, all of you. It was all beautiful answers and fantastic advice. Thank you. Thank you. Nicole, my next question is, in the hours and days kind of following immediately, it's normal to be quite exhausted. It's normal to be very sensitive and permeable. So knowing those things, I'd love for you to speak to what your recommendations are to people, what you commonly have seen kind of in that hours and a couple days after.
Yeah, I mean, even if one never moves from a singular spot during an experience like that, there's a lot that's happening. There's a lot that's happening in your nervous system and your, emotional states, like a lot of processing, even if it's not at a verbal level, or if it doesn't even look like much is happening, that there is just so much happening underneath the surface. And sometimes part of what these medicines, I feel like, can teach us is actually the art of deep rest, which sometimes can get confused with people feeling depressed. Actually, that there's a way of like, listening to the body's needs and providing adequate rest and nurturance that's not necessarily embedded in the way that our lifestyle is set up and organized, and our timing, and it can be really challenging, especially if someone has like a family and a normal, not typical 9-to-5 type of job that you might be going to. Like, that could really amplify a disconnect between what you as a being like actually need to kind of continue in a sustainable sort of way to live life, and what's kind of been happening. And so I like to just offer the opportunity for people to really listen and pay attention to that. I always prefer doing a journey on a Friday if I can, to give people a full weekend for that time to really recover. And that typically works well. And just giving space as much as possible to not immediately hop back into routine. Because Brenna pointed out, like, there is this neuroplastic window that's really getting activated. And so taking some time to almost still be in the journey, really, like still being in that curious observer place and tuned in at that deep level, to see what actually is my yes, and what actually is my no here. And I like to call it the getting familiar with the sacred yes and the sacred no, because if we really listen to those things, our choices might be different. And they might also be inconsistent from one day to another. And so I find it's really useful to actually observe various energy levels. What's our capacity? What's our yes? What's our moods? And it's a time and space to continue the work that has been started, and getting really clear on what you're stepping into.
Amazing. Thank you. Sarah?
I definitely think this piece is super important and belongs in the preparation conversation as well. I could really like to tell people it's very normal to be tired after a journey, even though it doesn't, just like Nicole said, is even if you're sitting in one place for the entire journey or you're laying down. And it's so important enough even that I've turned people away as clients if they were coming in, like for a business trip in Denver, and they just like wanted to drop down and do a journey and then hop back on a plane. I've said no, that's not something that I can do for you, and really be able to honor your experience. So yeah, really want to check in and make sure that people can accept that there is some space that needs to happen. And if not, maybe there's another conversation to be had. Like, what do we need to do in your preparation journey to make peace with space for you to exist, for you to integrate, even before you journey? I also like to talk about diet a little bit. I usually tell people, eat light foods going in, and then after the journey, you might need some serotonin assisting foods, some like avocados, nuts, whole grains, healthy fats, things that are like kind of help your nervous system reintegrate what's going on. So, plenty of hydration, plenty of fruits and vegetables, and then just like the healthy serotonin producing foods, I think is a big piece too. And then taking the time to eat them. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's, great. Mm-hmm. Brenna?
Yeah, the thing that I share with people after this work and in the hours and days following in particular is to be gentle. Be super gentle with yourself, and a tremendous amount of self-care and compassion, whatever that looks like for you. And that's different for everyone, occasionally I'll find people that come out on the other side with this just energy that still needs releasing. But oftentimes as the tape or the experience happens, it's just, exhaustion. And the thing that I find is important to note is to give yourself time on the other side, like to rest before you try and make meaning. Just let it be what it is. So I generally hold ceremony late morning. I'll come out early to late afternoon, tend to, the getting yourself grounded, nourishing your body, like checking in, journaling, doing art, but then not trying to put it together yet. Give yourself time to rest. And that's one of the reasons I find it supportive to start integration the next morning, so that they're not waiting a tremendous amount of time to put it together, but they're not trying to do it immediately. And just, using that as the spaciousness and the slowing down and the graceful period for yourself to understand you just did something big, even if it might not, you don't know what it is yet, it will show itself. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. My next question is frequently, and in my experience, it's tended to be people who have done less preparation work before experience a journey, is they have these huge experiences and huge revelations and epiphanies, and they come out, and the days following, they want to apply and implement those changes right away. And sometimes it's, I'm in a relationship that I'm not happy in, I need to leave it now, or my job, I need to leave it now. So when people have these really tremendous upheavals or revelations for themselves happen, how do you recommend working with that, Nicole?
Yeah. Slow down to speed up. That sort of, quickening can be a natural nervous system response too. Like let's just say, for example, somebody is a little bit depressed, right? And they get this surge of energy and it's like, whoa, okay, now I'm sort of riding this sympathetic nervous system wave. And I have the courage, right? I have the action inside of me that maybe I haven't had. So similarly, of just kind of really slowing down to speed up. And things can't always fully be taken at face value. And so providing some spaciousness to actually really determine what the true message is, because there are these various parts that are coming in, and the ego can be a real trickster. And so taking that time to really discern what actually is my higher self, sending me a message about what I can do. And if that's the case, taking some time and making some incremental steps and creating a little bit of a plan and giving space and time to feel each step along the way. Because if we just head forward towards a goal, then there's not really room to recalibrate. And if we just take one step, 1 degree, then before you know it, you're off on some other path. And it's much harder to come back later and course correct than just slowing down and really feeling into those possibilities. And I mean, I know for myself, I've had journeys before and I'm like, wow, okay, this is what I think that meant. This is what I think that pointed to. And I mean, goodness gracious, if I had acted on those things, I could have made some really, really big changes in mistakes in my life that weren't actually aligned for me. And, I'm like, oh, 6 months later, other things happen and I get to observe from that lens and still try it on. Is this true? How does my body resonate and respond to that? But if we don't give the time to really recalibrate, then we might be acting on even just from a nervous system level, a nervous system that actually isn't fully harmonized and in tune with what our bigger truth is. So.
Great. Sarah?
Again, I'm one of those people that had a journey and was like, oh my gosh, I have to make a huge life decision. I was a high school teacher, and I had a journey in which I was like, oh wow, I I could like see me going forward into the future and like just my body becoming like more and more bruised and decrepit. And like, I could just like see me, you know, aging into that end of that career in a really unhealthy way. That was scary, you know? But I didn't, you know, I got back, that was like, you know, May at the end of the school year. And then I knew it, but I also, you know, I like to think about how like the non-ordinary comes together to meet the ordinary. Like the non-ordinary said like, hey, it's going to be okay. Like you're going to be okay no matter what. If you live, if you die, like you will always be in the universe and you'll always be held by source. And no matter what you do, you're going to be okay. But, you know, kids in college and or kids going to college and like a mortgage and having to feed and nourish the house, like that's the ordinary reality that really matters. But I found that for me, I found there was great value in going through that year of teaching and planning for what I was going to do next. I was able to really look with a critical eye at what was going on. Why didn't I want that career? But like, why did I choose it in the first place? What was I noticing about the world, about myself? I've had a lot of people have that experience too. And I often will share that with people. Like there's a big, you know, like the big truth, like, yes, you're always going to be held. Like you will never stop being loved, or you'll never stop being abandoned, or you'll never be abandoned by source. And then the ordinary reality, like they need to meet somewhere for us to fit. But then there are also some things that we get in journey that are really important. You know, the same journey, you know, it was a life-changing decision that I had to make, like actually pretty soon. And the decision was like, I'd said something really mean to my sister. I was like, oh gosh, I really need to let her know. I get it, but that was really mean and I'm really sorry. And like, I had to do it within days, before like the armor came back on. And I was like, no, I was right. So I guess it really kind of depends on like the decision and the impact and, you know, hence the value of working with your guide or working with your community or your coach, just bouncing these things off. Like, I experienced this. What do you think? And I just guide people to say like, yeah, you might have a really big decision to make, but can you make use of the space between making that decision or actualizing that decision and knowing it? What can you learn in that space?
Yeah, thank you. I think what you just spoke to, having that support to mirror for you that's neutral and not as impacted by your choices is really important. Yeah, thank you. Brenna?
Yeah. I had a similar experience to you, Sarah. We didn't talk about that before, but yeah, the like life-changing journey where it's like your disease is because of how your life is being lived. And one of the things I find so beautiful about this medicine is you have a choice. Like now you have this information and you have a choice of what you do with it. And, you know, I've heard rules of thumb is if it's still a good idea in a month, then that's a time to move forward. But I don't like doing anything just by putting a specific timeline on it. I think the most important thing is to be able to find a way to weave both worlds. And that is what integration is. You know, like these big transformational life things like changing a career or getting out of a relationship or deciding whether you want or don't want to have a child, something of that nature. Like, it's still going to be there, but I think taking tiny steps and navigating along the way to see, like, as I correct, am I still feeling aligned with this decision? And what I see in myself and a lot of people is the somatic responses that come in the weeks and months after these journeys will really tell you whether you're moving in the direction that is aligned. And also, as Sarah said, there are going to be certain things that require immediate attention. And I think knowing, trusting your intuition as to which those are is really important. There can be tiny things that, are worth approaching right away. Telling your spouse how much they mean to you. If that came up in the journey and you were just in adoration of your loved ones, I think that is something that's absolutely beautiful to act upon immediately and not hold those things back. So just gauging that. And I think the other thing that feels important to note is your world doesn't change. Your inner landscape changes. And so as you're in the process of changing, to recognize that, be gentle with the people. A journey of mine's coming up around my relationship with my parents. And I had this revelation that if I wanted to be in alignment with them, I had to authentically tell them who I was, because I had held back the things that I thought I would be judged for. But I also had, enough discernment to say, if I came straight out of the gate of this journey and just came clean to my parents about everything in my life, it would be a shock to them. So it's, how do you approach those things slowly? And what I realized is it was a partially me. I didn't know my parents either. So in wanting them to get to know me, I took that as an opportunity to get to know them. And that became a very healing experience for everyone. So there's, a lot of different ways it can show up.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Thank you. My next question is, hopefully with a lot of preparation, intention, microdosing, having a guide and therapist and support, we hope to minimize kind of the challenging aspects of a journey, the transitions, the overwhelm and intensity, but we can't always, each journey will be what it is, right? And so if people do, especially when it's their first experience, if people do have those harder, more challenging experiences where there's a lot of fear or a lot of terror or memories suddenly resurfacing, I'd love for you guys to speak to that, how you hold that, especially when it's someone's first experience. Nicole, you can lead off.
Yeah. Well, I'll just speak to my approach, which might be a little bit different than some other people, but I found that it really works for the clients to come and see me, and it's very integratable. But I do step by step with people through a process, starting with microdosing, starting with lower doses, then being supported in that process by me, usually to develop that relationship. And then I tend to be a little bit more on the conservative side when it comes to the actual ceremony day, and I typically offer people 2 opportunities to work with the sacrament and make those choices, and that serves for someone who's really new to the experience, especially, to be able to kind of make it through that initial turbulence phase and find a little bit of footing and a little bit of stability to really get a sense for how much further that they want to go in. And so there's really, I'm operating really from a trauma-informed lensing with that perspective, and having the opportunity for deep listening and deep trust. And I'm helping them reflect and navigate that process. So to be honest with you, Casey, it doesn't really happen a lot under my care. There are a couple of exceptions, and I pointed to one of those last time, especially within a group experience, and sometimes things can get a little less predictable. Sometimes this isn't the most often, but sometimes something needs to just kind of loop its way through. And the best that you can really do is just be a steady, grounded presence in that instance. So, it's not always that something's going to cross through and find it kind of a real satisfactory completion. Like sometimes there really is a trauma loop that can show up, and nothing works in those instances. And so really it is just presence of being, basic breathing, making sure that someone is safe and taken care of, and then using the period of time once the journey is completed, making sure that they get to bed safely, taking care of all of those things before a conversation can really be had. And quite frankly, some people don't even always remember all of the things that happen in those states of being. And so, while it's true that, mushrooms themselves aren't a dissociative medicine, people will and do dissociate during the process sometimes. And so that could just point to, what type of support is really needed on a more sort of ongoing basis for that individual if they're uncovering some big things that they didn't know existed. To me, that points to maybe some more significant trauma than the person even knew that they had coming in, because there's some real dissociated parts that are needing to come to the surface and be integrated. So that's how I approach it.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Sarah.
Yeah, there's so many pieces to this. And I think it's like the big crux of why we want psychedelic education, right? It's like the possibility of a difficult journey, the seeing of the shadow, how that's going to play out. I agree with Nicole in that as a one-on-one guide, I tend to see difficult journeys a lot less. And I think that, just because of having that level of support, if somebody, what might have been like a crisis level difficult journey in a group turns out to be, something that somebody goes through, like a walk through, like a difficult part of their lives. And they might, and like the framing might be like, wow, that was so hard, but I did it. Like, I've had people say, at the end of a journey that they found really hard, where they walked through trauma, where they walked through pain in their body, and they'll be like, wow, I can't believe I did it. Like, I can't believe I could do it. And that's really important framing. This is warrior's work. Less and less am I a fan of like an enclosed circle of strangers working together in journey, because those difficult journeys, they can be influenced by what's going on with other people. People can experience shame at the expression of what's going on in their what's going on, or how the trauma is being processed. They might not get enough support from the facilitator, right? If there's like 12 people and one facilitator, like maybe they like really need the facilitator and they're experiencing fear that they can't get the support that they need. So I've seen that, I've had that. I don't want to duplicate that. I don't know. I tend to think that, and then the mushrooms, the plant medicines are teachers, and they show us what we need to learn. And sometimes that's really, really hard. I would say, like, congratulations if you have had a difficult journey and you made it to the other side.
Beautiful. Thank you. Brenda?
Yeah, I think you stated it at the beginning that preparation and building trust, not just with the facilitator, but also with the medicine, is one of the biggest factors of looking at a difficult journey with possibility. And the most transformational journeys that I have seen for people are often the ones where some of the most difficult things surface. And that's what needed to come up. And, I think it's also, there's one journey in particular I'm thinking of where this individual saw their ideal self, and they came out on the other side, and they were shattered by this idea because it seemed so far away. They didn't know how they could get there. And it's, breaking down those things into small, manageable parts and being in a container of support. And I remember one of my teachers said that, trauma that happens in relationship heals in relationship. And I think that's where the dynamic with a trained facilitator or guide can be so therapeutic. So when those things come up, there can be potential for healing to start happening in that trust and safe space. So difficult journeys, I think, are at times exactly what's needed, and that's the time and space to be able to dance with your shadows and really integrate them into the whole. So, yeah, I never want to tell someone that this is going to be all bliss. I heard it described as, swimming in an ocean of despair and then coming up on this blissful beach and then willingly going back into the ocean voluntarily because you can hold both at the same time. So that's the beauty of this work.
Right. Excellent. Thanks. Well, I have one more question for you all, and then we'll open it up to the group experience. In the weeks and months following a journey, when you're working with people in integration longer term, there's the talking aspect one-on-one with them. But what are the other things you do with people to really bring it all together in their body, in their spirit, and mentally?
I can speak first since I've been speaking first. Really bringing together the integrated components of the body with the emotional state, with the imaginal and mental sort of realm, being the holistic sort of integrated spiritual experience. And so I will have people, really identify the places that stood out for them in that journey. And it doesn't even have to be like a profound message. Like I will often say, like, really what stood out in terms of the feeling state for someone. And from that feeling state, usually that has much more information associated with it. And so walking someone through really finding that information for them again, like, okay, what is the feeling? Like, where does that live in the body? Like, is there a color that happens to go with that? And then really being able to take that information and broaden the landscape of it to get a sense for, okay, like, well, what are the emotions that go with this? And what are the other images that are coming up? And it gets to be a really beautiful, creative sort of process that I'm helping them to paint a picture in their mind that they can come back to, that it can be a resource, that they get that sense of what a full yes feels like in their being. It's kind of what I was mentioning last time around the intention also, like what's the felt sense of the intention? And this is sort of like, well, what's the felt sense that got opened up and got unlocked in that journey space that you really want to create more spaciousness for? And so that's one of the exercises that I will walk people through specifically, and then finding out what their particular learning style or what channels are most turned on for them. And so sometimes people end up finding like, wow, like I had a lot of writing come through, written words. And so that might be a way for them to just sort of transmit and express Other people might be like, wow, I've got a lot of visual images. And so inviting, mind mapping is a way that I personally like to journal, because I think both in words and visually, and it can be a really beautiful way to help bring connections in. It's also a little bit playful and has just enough structure without really holding to that. And it's something that can just be branched off from. So really planting, taking those seeds that have already been planted and nurturing them at all of the layers of body, emotion, mind, and spirit.
Thank you. Lovely. Sarah?
Yeah, I like to track this along with the preparation conversation. And, my first step is just to let people know that the integration process is, a lifetime, but that the months, several months after the journey are important and really matter, just so that there's that priming. And I think there's sort of like a few things, a few key terms that I think are really important. One is just tracking, right? So like tracking what was realized in the journey, and then tracking that throughout the life, like almost as if we're like, following a trail of breadcrumbs. Is it bringing us back home? Is it bringing us further away from where we wanted to be? Like, how are we tracking the medicine that we got throughout our lives? How are we tracking ourselves? And then there's this awareness. Awareness is really important. Like, sometimes I only get, just depending on who I'm working with, sometimes I'm only going to get to integration sessions, like from working with Psychedelic Passage, for example, like the package contains 2 integration sessions. And so like, what can I do? What are the most important things that I can do with people? Well, the one thing I can do is find out what it means, like find out what self-respect means, right? Like, can we define what self-respect means for you now? Like, is that different than what it was before? Like, what does it mean to implement that in your life? Self-honor, self-respect, honor of self as medicine. And then the second thing is like training that awareness. So I show people awareness, like how do we suddenly become aware of what we're doing, of what's going on? There's a somatic piece, right? How does my body feel? Do I feel nauseated? Do I feel drained? Do I feel energized? Tracking that self-honor. And then I teach people of these, I call this sacred questions. And I have people, recommend that people do this often. Just simply saying, I'm noticing blank, and have them check in with what they're noticing. And then this is showing me blank. This is teaching me that blank. And those are sacred questions I learned in nature connected work, but I find it really useful in integration as well. And then also just, I think there are some really important practices like breath work. You guys were talking about breath work. When we're talking about integrating something into our nervous system, if we want it to stick, if we want it to last, if we want the goodness to last, a breath is a great way to do that. Meditation, of movement practice like Qigong is a really supportive practice as well, or like a dance or an expressive practice. So if I get the chance to do that, I'll also maybe show them some, or at least, find out what are some somatic skills that might be helpful.
Beautiful. Thank you. Brenna?
Yeah, I love the word notice when it comes to the after part of the journey. Is notice what you notice. And often they can be very subtle. In fact, I think a lot of the fact that we're in such a rational society and this work is so embodied, that getting into the body and feeling what starts arising is something that's a practice that it's almost like working with your intuition. So, I recommend people just really pay attention to what comes up in so many different circumstances, because it's going to teach you so much about yourself, how you feel in response to certain emotions that you display, or conversations or environments, even like the most subtle thing, like turning on the news, and like, how are you feeling when you're watching this? What's it bringing up in you? And I think a lot of them were already there. We just didn't pay attention to them. And after this work, the capacity to really be in yourself, in your body, in your being, and notice what your soma is telling you is really important. And I agree, with Nicole, everyone processes in different ways. There's a lot of thinkers, and to be able to tell a thinker or ask a thinker, how are you feeling? It just feels like a totally foreign landscape. So understanding everyone's mode of orientation. But, I think it's such an important part of this work is to really bring together your intuition, your mind, your heart, and your inner wisdom, and know that these are all parts of the whole that want to harmoniously work together to help you navigate. And so to allow all of them to be part of the process, I think is really supportive.
Thank you. I was just reminded I had the pleasure of being with these three just together in person a little over a week ago. And at the end of our time together, Nicole and Sarah led an embodiment experience. And one of the prompts was to partner and to, without words, in movement or dance, re-experience our first journey. And it was such a profound, beautiful experience. I just like tears to come to my eyes, just what that brought up, that reconnecting in an embodied way. I was like, this is, whether it's microdosing or as part of my next journey, from now on, I think I will always bring that and weave that into my experience. So I love that. So thank you. But it speaks to what all three of you just spoke to, and weaving together all of the facets of self. We're such mental beings. We'll talk about it and talk about it, but weaving it all together in an embodied way is just as, or sometimes more powerful. So thank you.